there is a specific kind of silence that fills a home when the life you thought you built turns out to be a graveyard. Damian Russo walked into his $20 million Tribeca penthouse expecting the warm embrace of his pregnant wife. Instead, he found the echoing stillness of stripped walls, emptied safes, and a dining table bearing a single, crisp ultrasound photograph. Pinned to the image was a bank transfer receipt showing an offshore balance of 0 and a handwritten note in Serena's elegant script. "You broke your vow, Damian, so I broke your empire. We will never be found." By the time his men realized the shipments had been intercepted and the accounts drained, his pregnant wife was already a ghost, and the city's most feared boss was left standing in the ashes of his own making. Serena Gallagher was never supposed to be a Mafia wife. Before she met Damian Russo at a charity gala in Manhattan, she was a senior forensic accountant for a top-tier firm on Wall Street. She lived in spreadsheets, analyzing discrepancies in corporate mergers. She was rational, grounded, and civilian. But Damian was a hurricane. He was the heir to the Russo crime syndicate, a sprawling network of shipping, construction, and underground extortion that choked the East Coast. He swept her off her feet with old-world charm, private jets to the Amalfi Coast, and promises that his business would never touch her. For 5 years he kept that promise. They built a beautiful, insulated life. But the one thing they couldn't control was biology. After 3 devastating miscarriages, the silence in their 6-bedroom Hamptons estate had grown deafening. Then, the miracle happened. Serena was finally pregnant, safely past the 5-month mark, carrying the son Damian had always demanded. She thought the pregnancy would cement their bond. Instead, it was the exact moment Damian began to slip away. It started with the classic clichés, the kind Serena would have rolled her eyes at in a movie. Late nights, emergency meetings with union bosses. But Serena wasn't a naive girl. She was an auditor. She noticed patterns. She noticed that the mileage on his armored Maybach didn't match the distance to the docks in Red Hook. She noticed the sudden, subtle change in the way he held his phone, the screen always angled slightly away, the notifications set to silent. The definitive crack in the foundation happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. Damian came home at 3 a.m., slipping into bed with the stealth of a thief. He kissed her forehead, whispering an apology for the late hour. But as he leaned in, Serena's breath caught. Underneath the smell of his signature Tom Ford cologne and the faint, metallic tang of expensive scotch, there was something else. A perfume. Baccarat Rouge 540. It was unmistakable, heavy and sweet, a scent she had specifically told Damian she hated because it gave her migraines. The next morning, while Damian was in the shower, the hot water running over his scarred back, Serena did what any woman trusting her gut would do. She didn't scream or confront him. She went straight to his discarded suit jacket. She checked the pockets. Nothing. But in the lining of his bespoke trousers, she found a crumpled receipt. It was from the Carlisle Hotel's private dining room. A bill for 2, paid in cash. Date: the previous night, right when he claimed to be interrogating a harbor master in New Jersey. Serena didn't cry. She felt a cold, sharp numbness spread from her chest, down to the swell of her stomach. She placed her hand over her unborn child. The tears would have to wait. She needed proof. Serena bypassed Damian's security detail and reached out to Arthur Penhaligon, a disgraced former NYPD detective who owed her late father a favor. Arthur was quiet, efficient, and operated entirely off the grid. She gave him Damian's license plate and a burner phone. 3 days later, Arthur sat across from her in an inconspicuous diner in Queens, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Russo," Arthur rasped, his eyes cast downward. Serena opened the envelope. The photographs were high resolution, taken from a telephoto lens. Damien, walking out of a luxury high-rise on the Upper East Side. He wasn't alone. Wrapped around his arm was a stunning, dark-haired woman. But it wasn't just a random mistress. Serena recognized her instantly. It was Isabella Vitti, the youngest daughter of the Vitti family, Damien's biggest rivals in the narcotics trade. Damien wasn't just cheating on his pregnant wife. He was sleeping with the enemy, likely forging an illicit alliance to bypass the strict rules of the commission. He was risking their lives, their unborn son's future, and his entire empire for an affair. Serena stared at a photo of Damien, kissing Isabella's neck against the tinted glass of an SUV. The man who had held her hand while she cried over lost pregnancies was smiling a smile she hadn't seen in years. "How long?" Serena asked, her voice eerily calm. "From what the doorman at her building accidentally let slip." "6 months," Arthur replied. "Right around the time you found out you were pregnant." Serena closed the envelope. The betrayal was absolute. If she confronted him, Damien would gaslight her, lock her away in the Hamptons with guards, and claim it was for her protection. He was a mob boss. He didn't do divorces. He only did widows. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted to protect her son, she couldn't just leave. She had to annihilate him. Grief is a strange catalyst. For some, it is paralyzing. For Serena Russo, it was high-octane fuel. When she returned to the penthouse that afternoon, she walked into the marble bathroom, stared at her reflection, and practiced a lie. She forced her lips into a soft, loving smile. She smoothed her maternity dress over her bump. She became the perfect, docile Mafia wife. Damien came home that evening, carrying a bouquet of white peonies, her favorite. "For my beautiful wife and my strong boy," Damien purred, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his large hands on her stomach. Serena leaned her head back against his chest, suppressing the violent urge to shove him away. "You're home early," she said smoothly, keeping her heart rate steady. "Finished up at the docks faster than expected. I wanted to spend the evening with you." He kissed her cheek. "I missed you." "I missed you too, Damien," she lied seamlessly. That night, after Damien fell into a heavy, whiskey-induced sleep, the architect of his ruin went to work. Serena slipped out of bed, taking his master keyring. She descended to the basement of their Tribeca building, to the heavily fortified home office Damien thought was impenetrable. He had changed the passcode on the biometric lock, but Serena had installed a hidden micro-camera in the smoke detector months ago, back when she first started feeling paranoid about his safety. She punched in the new code, 0418, Isabella's birthday. Serena scoffed quietly as the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, the room was a fortress of ledgers, cash drops, and digital hardware. Damien was ruthless, but he wasn't tech-savvy. He relied on a network of Swiss accountants to manage his untraceable wealth. But Serena was a forensic auditor. Give her a thread and she would unravel the sweater. She booted up his secure terminal. Using a cloned security key she had commissioned from Arthur's underground contacts, she bypassed the firewall. The screen illuminated with the lifeblood of the Russo syndicate, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies registered in Delaware and Belize, cryptocurrency cold wallets holding tens of millions in laundered funds. She couldn't just drain the accounts at once. The alarms would trigger immediately. She had to set up a slow, methodical bleed, funneling the money into a labyrinth of dummy corporations she had secretly set up under the maiden name of her late mother. Night after night, while Damien was either sleeping beside her or out working with Isabella, Serena siphoned the Russo empire. She transferred $500,000 here, $1.2 million there, disguising the outbound transfers as routine payments to corrupt union bosses and phantom construction suppliers. She altered the digital ledgers to reflect bad investments and seized shipments, creating a paper trail that pointed toward internal theft by Damien's own lieutenants. But money wasn't enough. Serena needed inside help to orchestrate her escape. She needed someone who understood the physical movements of the syndicate. She arranged a covert meeting at a botanical garden in the Bronx with Thomas Blackwood, Damien's chief legal counsel and most trusted fixer. Thomas was a brilliant lawyer, but more importantly, he was a pragmatist. Serena knew a secret about Thomas. He despised Damien's reckless leadership and had been skimming off the top for years. As they walked past the blooming orchids, Serena didn't mince words. "I know about the $4 million you routed through the shell company in Panama, Thomas. The one you told Damien was lost to a federal freeze." Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his face draining of color. "Serena, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me," she replied coldly, not looking at him. "I audited the books. I have the digital trail. Damien would have you buried under the new stadium foundation by midnight if I showed him." Thomas swallowed hard, looking around nervously. "What do you want?" "I want out, and I want to take him down," Serena said, finally meeting his eyes. "He's sleeping with Isabella Viti. He's compromised the family, the rules, and my marriage. I am leaving, and when I do, I am taking the Empire's cash reserves with me. You are going to help me legally blindfold him, or I hand the ledger to his enforcers." Thomas stared at the pregnant woman in front of him, realizing he had vastly underestimated her. She wasn't a pawn. She was the queen, and she was currently moving across the board to checkmate the king. "What do you need me to do?" Thomas asked, conceding defeat. "Draft the paperwork for a blind trust. Tell him it's an ironclad tax shelter for the baby's inheritance. Hide the deed transfers to the safe houses in the fine print. I want his properties signed over to an entity I control." "And Thomas?" Serena smiled, a chilling expression. "You'll be richly rewarded when it's done. Or dead if you double-cross me. Your choice." The tension in the penthouse was thick enough to slice with a garrote, though Damien remained blissfully unaware. He thought he was playing the ultimate game, balancing his ruthless underworld dominion, his passionate affair with Isabella, and his domestic tranquility with Serena. In reality, he was a rat in a maze, and his wife was holding the cheese. It was week 3 of Serena's shadow campaign. She was 6 months pregnant now, the physical toll of her secret war beginning to show in the dark circles under her eyes, which she carefully concealed with expensive makeup. Damien returned from a 3-day business trip in Miami. Serena knew he hadn't been to Florida. Arthur had tracked his car to a secluded cabin in the Catskills, where Isabella Viti had been waiting. "How was the heat?" Serena asked innocently, over a dinner of branzino she had personally cooked. She poured him a glass of Barolo, keeping her own glass filled with sparkling water. "Brutal," Damien lied, cutting into the fish. "The suppliers down there are getting restless. Took days of negotiations just to secure the new shipping routes." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "But all I could think about was you and our son. I hate leaving you alone like this." Serena looked down at his hand. He was wearing a new Patek Philippe watch, Isabella's taste. "It's fine, darling," she said softly, squeezing his fingers. I know you're building our future. Speaking of which, Thomas sent over the final documents for the baby's trust fund today." Damien waved a hand dismissively. "Good. As long as it protects the assets from the feds, I'm happy." "Did you read it over?" "I did. It's perfectly structured," Serena replied. She reached to the side table, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents, flagged with neon sticky notes. She set them next to his plate, uncapping a Mont Blanc pen. "Just sign where the tabs are. Thomas needs to file it with the state by tomorrow morning." Damien didn't even read the first page. He was too arrogant, too trusting of his subjugated wife and his frightened lawyer. He scrawled his signature across 15 different pages. With every stroke of the pen, he signed away the legal ownership of his private jet, his 3 unlisted safe houses in Europe, and the title to the very penthouse they were sitting in. The entities were now legally bound to a trust controlled exclusively by Serena. "Done," Damien said, tossing the pen aside. "Now, let's talk about something else. You look tired, Mea-Luz." "The baby has been kicking a lot," she deflected. "He's strong, like his father." Damien beamed with pride, but his smile faded the next morning when his encrypted phone rang at 6 a.m. Serena lay perfectly still in bed, pretending to be asleep, as Damien paced the bedroom, his voice a low, furious hiss. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen?" "Which one?" "No, that's impossible. The UBS account had 12 million in it. A withdrawal? Authorized by who?" Damien threw a crystal glass against the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. Serena jolted up, acting terrified. "Damien, what's wrong?" He turned to her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with a sudden, suffocating panic. "Someone is inside our network," he growled. "One of my capos just told me a massive transfer hit the ledger, routed through the Cayman accounts. They drained it." "Oh my God," Serena gasped, pulling the duvet up. "Who would do that? The feds?" "If it was the feds, they'd be kicking our door down right now," Damien said, pacing like a caged tiger. "This was an inside job. Someone has my codes. Someone in my inner circle is stealing from me." Serena watched the paranoia take root. This was the most dangerous phase of her plan. She had intentionally framed Damien's 2 top lieutenants, Carlo and Paulie, by routing the initial stolen funds through IP addresses linked to their known associates. "Damien, please be careful," Serena pleaded, her voice trembling. "If your own men are turning on you, what does that mean for us? For the baby? No one touches you. No one," Damien swore, pulling a Glock from the bedside safe and racking the slide. "I am going to find out who did this, and I am going to make an example out of them. Lock the doors. Do not let anyone in except my personal guards." As Damien stormed out of the penthouse, calling for a violent purge of his own ranks, Serena slowly lowered the duvet. She picked up her phone and sent a single encrypted text to Arthur Penhaligon. "Phase 2 complete. The dog is biting its own tail. Prepare the extraction." She walked over to the shattered glass on the floor, carefully picking up a jagged shard. She looked at her reflection in the mirrored closet doors. The loving, naive wife was dead. The woman staring back at her was ruthless, untouchable, and ready to watch Rome burn. The Russo syndicate did not collapse overnight. It bled out from 1,000 microscopic cuts. By the end of the 4th week, Damien's paranoia had metastasized into a full-blown reign of terror. The framed lieutenants, Carlo and Paulie, were the first to face his wrath. Serena sat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of their penthouse, calmly sipping a cup of decaffeinated Earl Grey tea, while the secure phone on the kitchen island buzzed with frantic updates. She was 7 months pregnant now, her movements slower, her body a perfect, unassuming shield. Who would suspect the heavily pregnant, devoted wife of orchestrating a multi-million-dollar cyber heist? Damien had transformed his basement office into a war room. He had brought in his own external security consultant, a ruthless ex-mercenary named Donovan Hayes, to interrogate Carlo and Paulie. Serena had anticipated this. She had spent the previous weekend planting digital breadcrumbs on a burner laptop hidden in Paulie's locker at the Red Hook docks, a laptop Arthur Penhaligon had seamlessly slipped past the guards. That evening, Damien trudged upstairs, his knuckles bruised and his dress shirt unbuttoned, reeking of stale sweat and cheap cigar smoke. He poured himself 4 fingers of Macallan and collapsed onto the velvet sofa opposite Serena. "Did you find the money, Damien?" she asked, her voice laced with the perfect pitch of wifely concern. She rested a protective hand over her swollen belly. "No," Damien spat, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. "Paulie swears blind. He doesn't know anything about the Cayman accounts." Carlo cried like a child. But Donovan cracked Paulie's locker. He found a laptop with encrypted communications to a Swiss bank. They were funneling it out, Serena. "My own men. What did you do with them?" Damien looked up, his dark eyes hollow and completely devoid of empathy. "What I had to do. They won't be a problem anymore. But the money is gone. 15 million, washed through a dozen shell companies before Donovan could trace the IP addresses." Serena's heart beat a steady, triumphant rhythm. The $15 million was currently sitting safely in an irrevocable trust under the name SG Holdings in Zurich. "But it gets worse," Damien continued, leaning forward, the alcohol loosening his normally guarded tongue. Donovan decrypted the final ping from the laptop. The IP address didn't bounce to Switzerland. It bounced to a server in Brooklyn, a server owned by the Vitti family. Serena had to bite the inside of her cheek to stop herself from smiling. That was her masterpiece. She had paid Arthur an extra $50,000 to route the fake ledger trails through a known Vitti front company, a commercial laundry service in Williamsburg. "The Vittis?" Serena gasped, feigning shock. "But I thought there was a truce. Damien, if the Vitti family is stealing from you—" "It means Carlo and Paulie were rats," Damien snarled, hurling his glass into the fireplace. The crystal shattered, flames licking at the spilled scotch. "It means Vincent Vitti is trying to bankrupt me before making a move on the ports. I trusted them." He caught himself, realizing he had almost said her. He had almost said, "Isabella." "Damien, you need to be careful," Serena whispered, walking over and placing a gentle hand on his tense shoulder. "If the Vittis are backing a coup, you can't trust anyone outside this house." "I know," he muttered, pulling her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "You and the boy. You're the only pure things left in my life. I will burn Brooklyn to the ground before I let Vincent Vitti take what is mine." As Damien began dialing his capos to order retaliatory strikes on Vitti businesses, Serena walked back to the bedroom. She had successfully weaponized her husband against his own mistress. The illicit alliance between Damien and Isabella was about to shatter under the weight of a multi-million-dollar misunderstanding. The fallout was spectacular and immediate. By Friday, 2 of the Vitti family's illegal gambling fronts in Queens had been firebombed by Russo loyalists. In retaliation, a Russo shipment of stolen electronics was hijacked on the Brooklyn-Queens expressway. The underworld was at war, and Damien was losing his grip on the steering wheel. For Isabella Vitti, the romance of sleeping with a rival boss died the moment her brother was hospitalized by one of Damien's enforcers. Serena monitored the disintegration of their affair through Arthur. He provided her with an audio recording captured by a parabolic microphone aimed at a hotel window where Damien and Isabella were having a secret, explosive meeting. Sitting in her walk-in closet with the door locked, Serena pressed play on the encrypted file. Isabella, screaming. "You sent your animals after my brother. Are you out of your mind, Damien? My father is calling for a sit-down with the commission." Damien, "Your father stole $15 million from my offshore accounts. He bought my lieutenants. You think I'm going to sit back and let him strip my empire while I'm in bed with you?" Isabella, "Are you listening to yourself? We didn't touch your money. You're paranoid, Damien. Your own men are robbing you blind because you're losing your mind." Damien, "Get out! If I see you near my territory again, I won't care whose daughter you are." Serena paused the recording. The affair was dead. The alliance was broken. Damien was completely, utterly isolated. But orchestrating a war required collateral damage, and the strain was beginning to show on the one man who knew Serena's true capabilities, Thomas Blackwood. The syndicate's lawyer was panicking. The IRS had started sniffing around the frozen dummy accounts, and Damien's erratic violence had terrified him. Thomas requested an emergency meeting with Serena at a crowded art gallery in Chelsea, hoping the public venue would offer him some protection. Serena arrived wearing a pristine white trench coat, looking every bit the radiant, expectant mother. Thomas, on the other hand, looked like a man walking to the gallows. He was sweating through his bespoke suit. "We have to stop," Thomas hissed, pretending to admire a modern art installation. "Damien is unhinged. He put a hit out on a Viti capo last night. The commission is getting involved. If they look too closely at the asset transfers, they'll see the blind trust. They'll see your name, Serena." "Keep your voice down, Thomas," Serena commanded, her tone dropping 10 degrees. "The trust is buried under 4 layers of corporate obfuscation in Delaware and shielded by attorney-client privilege. Unless you talk, no one finds it." "I can't do this anymore," Thomas choked out, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "I want my cut now. I'm taking my family to London. I'm out." Serena slowly turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were devoid of the warmth she usually projected. "Thomas, you seem to be under the illusion that you are negotiating with a rational, law-abiding citizen," Serena said smoothly, stepping closer so only he could hear her. "You are not. You are negotiating with a woman whose husband lies to her, cheats on her, and puts a target on her unborn child's back." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a small manila folder, sliding it into the deep pocket of Thomas's coat. "What is this?" he whispered. "That is a heavily documented trail of the $4 million you embezzled, along with a signed affidavit from a Cayman banker explicitly naming you as the sole architect of the recent $15 million theft from Damien's accounts," Serena stated factually. "I have a dead man's switch on my email. If I do not manually reset it every 24 hours, that file goes directly to Donovan Hayes. Do you know what Donovan does to thieves, Thomas?" Thomas stared at her, the blood draining from his face. He realized in that moment that Damien Russo was a brute, but Serena Russo was a monster born of pure, cold logic. "You're a sociopath," Thomas breathed. "I'm an auditor," Serena corrected him, a faint, chilling smile playing on her lips. "I balance the books. Now, you are going to finalize the transfer of the Tribeca penthouse deed, and you are going to book me a private charter to Geneva for the end of the month. The baby is due in 6 weeks. I will not be here when the water breaks." She patted his rigid arm, turned, and walked out of the gallery, leaving the lawyer drowning in the wake of her perfectly calculated destruction. The board was set for the final move. Damien had lost his money, his allies, his mistress, and his mind. Now, it was time to take his legacy. The final week of Serena Gallagher's life in New York was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. To her husband, she remained the delicate, heavily pregnant wife, nesting in their Tribeca penthouse while he fought a grueling, bloody war against the Vitti family. To the underworld, the Russo syndicate was bleeding out from 1,000 invisible wounds, completely unaware that the architect of their demise was currently browsing luxury cribs online. Damien's empire was crumbling faster than he could patch the holes, and the stress was making him reckless. The Federal Bureau of Investigation fed anonymous, heavily encrypted tips through Proton Mail accounts set up by Serena, had raided 2 of his primary shipping containers at the Newark ports just 48 hours prior. Millions in contraband were seized before they ever hit the streets. In response to the escalating chaos, the Commission, the ancient, ruthless governing body of the 5 families, had summoned Damien for a mandatory sit-down at a private dining room in Sparks Steak House in Midtown. He was to answer for the unauthorized, retaliatory violence against Vincent Vitti. It was the perfect, unmissable distraction. Damien would be completely stripped of his phones, flanked only by his top enforcers, and cut off from the outside world for at least 4 hours while he negotiated for his life. On a brisk, overcast Thursday morning, Damien stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in their master bedroom, adjusting the Windsor knot of his charcoal Tom Ford tie. Serena sat on the edge of the California king bed, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. She watched him through the reflection, taking in the bruised jaw and the dark, exhausted circles under his eyes. "I won't be back until late," Damien murmured, slipping into his tailored suit jacket. He walked over to her, his heavy footsteps muffled by the plush Persian rug. He leaned down, placing a warm, calloused hand over her swollen stomach, and kissed her forehead. "Lock the doors. Do not let anyone up unless Donovan personally clears them. I love you, Serena. I love you too, Damien," she lied, her voice as smooth and untroubled as still water. "Good luck today." As the heavy oak doors of the master suite clicked shut behind him, Serena set her teacup down. She listened intently as the private elevator chimed, taking her husband down to the armored escalade waiting in the subterranean garage. She waited exactly 10 minutes, watching the GPS tracker she had hidden in the lining of his briefcase inch its way up the FDR drive. Once he passed 34th Street, the mask finally dropped. Serena didn't pack a suitcase. Suitcases left a physical trail. They were cumbersome and invited questions from the doorman. Instead, she dressed in a simple, elegant cashmere Brunello Cucinelli sweater, comfortable black maternity leggings, and a wool Max Mara overcoat. On her wrist, she clasped her late mother's vintage Cartier watch. Inside a sleek, unassuming leather tote bag, she placed only 3 items of absolute necessity. The first was a meticulously forged Canadian passport bearing the name Clara Hughes, arranged by Arthur Penhaligon's most expensive contact. The second was a solid-state encrypted hard drive containing the decryption keys to the $45 million she had successfully siphoned and sheltered in irrevocable Swiss and Cayman trusts. The third was the physical ultrasound photograph of her son. Everything else, the diamond tennis bracelets, the designer wardrobe, the life she had built over 5 years, was dead weight. At precisely 2 p.m., the private service elevator in the rear of the penthouse hummed to life. The doors parted to reveal a team of 6 men and women dressed in the crisp, neutral uniforms of a high-end interior redesign firm. In reality, they were a crew of elite, black-market liquidators Serena had hired using untraceable Monero cryptocurrency. They operated with ruthless, silent efficiency. "You have exactly 2 hours," Serena instructed the crew chief, a stoic man named Victor. "Take only what is on the manifest." Victor nodded and his team dispersed like phantoms. They didn't smash or destroy. They surgically dismantled the visible wealth of the Rousseau home. They carefully unhooked the $20 million Jean-Michel Basquiat painting from the foyer wall, wrapping it in protective foam and sliding it into a custom crate. They rolled up the antique Persian rugs. They bypassed the biometric lock on Damien's secondary wall safe, a code Serena had compromised months ago by dusting the keypad for oils, and emptied it of $3 million in bearer bonds, conflict-free diamonds, and emergency cash reserves. The liquidators were permitted to keep 50% of the physical assets they fenced. The rest was to be rotated through a shell company in Belize that Serena controlled. It was the ultimate insult, using Damien's own stolen emergency funds to finance her disappearance. While the penthouse was being stripped to its bare bones, a secondary, far more lethal mechanism was clicking into place 15 miles away. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, Thomas Blackwood sat in the secluded corner of the British Airways first-class lounge, sweating profusely through his bespoke suit. The syndicate's chief legal counsel had a boarding pass for a direct flight to London Heathrow, burning a hole in his breast pocket. His hands trembled as he opened a burner laptop on the small marble table. Serena had given him an ultimatum, backed by the irrefutable proof of his own embezzlement. If he did not execute the final phase of her plan, he would be a dead man by sunset. Thomas logged into the secure, heavily encrypted legal portal he maintained for the Rousseau family. He pulled up the finalized paperwork for the blind trust Damien had foolishly signed weeks ago, believing it to be a tax shelter for his unborn son. With a series of keystrokes, Thomas executed the irrevocable transfer of the Tribeca penthouse deed, the titles to 3 European safe houses, and the ownership of the corporate holding company that managed Damien's private Gulfstream jet. The assets were instantly absorbed by a sovereign wealth fund in Dubai, legally untouchable by US authorities or the Commission. Thomas stared at the confirmation screen for a long, agonizing moment. He had just legally disinherited one of the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard. He slammed the laptop shut, dumped it into a nearby trash receptacle, and practically sprinted toward his boarding gate. Back in Tribeca, the clock struck 4:15 p.m. The liquidators were gone, leaving behind echoing, hollow rooms. Serena walked through the barren foyer, the silence pressing against her eardrums. She did not feel sorrow. She did not feel fear. She felt the cold, sharp clarity of a survivor. She descended the private elevator to the parking garage, bypassing the lobby entirely. Arthur Penhaligon was idling in a shadowed corner in a dark, heavily tinted Volvo XC90. The vehicle had switched license plates 3 times since leaving Queens. Serena pulled the heavy door open and slid into the back seat, settling into the leather. "Everything is green, Mrs. Rousseau," Arthur rasped, glancing in the rearview mirror as he put the car in drive. "Thomas is in the air over the Atlantic. The decoy server in Brooklyn just wiped itself with military-grade overwrite software. And the private charter we secured under the Hughes alias is fueled and waiting on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport." "Take the George Washington Bridge, Arthur," Serena instructed, her voice steady and commanding. "Damien's men are heavily monitoring the Lincoln and Holland tunnels, expecting VT retaliation. We take the long way around." As the Volvo merged onto the West Side Highway, the grey, oppressive skyline of Manhattan loomed in the windows. Serena pulled out a final, sterile burner phone. She opened a draft email that had been sitting in the outbox for a week. The recipient was the official intake address for the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force in New York. Attached to the email were unredacted digital ledgers detailing 10 years of Rousseau syndicate extortion and money laundering. There were audio recordings, captured by Arthur's parabolic microphones, of Damien discussing hits and narcotics shipments with Isabella Vitti. Finally, there was a document containing the exact GPS coordinates and security access codes for the syndicate's remaining drug processing warehouses in New Jersey. Serena stared at the send button. This was the point of no return. Once she pressed it, Damien would not only be penniless and homeless, but he would also become the most hunted man in the United States. He would be cornered by the feds, hunted by the Vittis, and abandoned by his own terrified men. She thought of the Baccarat Rouge perfume. She thought of the offshore accounts. She placed her hand over her stomach, feeling a sharp, distinct kick against her palm. "I've got you," she whispered to the empty air. Serena pressed send. She snapped the burner phone in half, rolled down the window just a fraction, and dropped the pieces into the rushing currents of the Hudson River as they drove over the bridge. She leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes as the car carried her toward her new life, leaving the King of New York to burn in the empire of ashes she had built for him. The black armored Escalade cut through the slick, rain-soaked streets of Lower Manhattan like a shark navigating dark waters. In the back seat, Damien Russo sat in heavy silence, nursing a tumbler of scotch poured from the vehicle's hidden console. His knuckles were bruised, the knuckles of his custom Brioni suit jacket were stained with a faint spray of blood that wasn't his, and a deep, pulsing headache throbbed behind his eyes. The sit-down at Sparks Steakhouse had been a grueling, 4-hour war of attrition. The Commission, the 5 ancient men who governed the city's invisible underworld, had not been merciful. They had demanded a staggering 30% cut of Damien's remaining legitimate businesses as a penalty for the unauthorized violence against Vincent Vitti's crew. They had ordered him to hand over the Red Hook docks. It was a humiliating, crippling blow to his pride, but Damien had swallowed his rage and agreed. He had survived. That was the mantra repeating in his mind as the tires hissed against the wet asphalt. He had lost territory, and his cash reserves were mysteriously bleeding, but he had survived the coup. As the SUV pulled up to the private loading bay of his Tribeca high-rise, Damien's thoughts turned to the only thing that mattered now. Serena. The vision of his pregnant wife, safe and warm in their multi-million-dollar fortress, was the anchor holding his fracturing sanity together. He would pour himself another drink, bury his face in her soft neck, and listen to the steady heartbeat of his unborn son. He would rebuild. He was a Russo. Rebuilding from the ashes was in his blood. "Wait here," Damien ordered his driver and his 2 hulking bodyguards. "I don't want anyone coming up. I need the night with my wife." "Yes, boss," the driver murmured, keeping his eyes forward. Damien swiped his biometric thumbprint on the private elevator's scanner. The brass doors slid shut, sealing him in a quiet, mahogany-paneled box that shot upward to the penthouse occupying the top 2 floors. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a home when the life you thought you built turns out to be a graveyard. As the elevator doors parted with a soft chime, Damien stepped into the grand foyer. He didn't notice the anomaly immediately. He was too busy loosening his silk tie and unbuttoning his collar. But as he looked up to hang his trench coat, his hand stopped in midair. The wall facing the elevator was bare. The $20 million Basquiat canvas, a vibrant, chaotic masterpiece that Serena had purchased at auction 2 years prior, was gone. In its place was a pale, rectangular ghost on the charcoal-painted wall. Damien frowned, confusion momentarily overriding the exhaustion. He stepped further into the foyer. The antique Persian runner rug, a hand-woven piece from the 18th century, was missing from the marble floor. The custom-built entryway table, usually holding a crystal bowl for keys and mail, had vanished. A cold, metallic prickle of adrenaline washed over his skin. "Serena?" he called out, his deep voice booming through the cavernous space. There was no answer, just the hollow, bouncing echo of his own voice. The acoustics of the penthouse were entirely wrong. Without the heavy velvet drapes, the plush carpets, and the imported Italian furniture to absorb the sound, the apartment felt like an abandoned cathedral. He drew his weapon, a customized Glock 19, from his shoulder holster with practiced, fluid speed. His mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. Vincent Vitti had ignored the commission's ruling. The Vittis had bypassed his security, infiltrated the building, and taken his wife. "Serena!" Damien roared, sprinting down the long hallway toward the master suite. He kicked the heavy double doors open, sweeping the room with the barrel of his gun. The room was perfectly intact, the king-sized bed made with military precision. But something was fundamentally wrong. The scent of her, the soft, floral notes of her expensive lotion, was entirely absent, replaced by the sterile smell of industrial cleaning supplies. Damien moved to the massive, custom-built walk-in closet. He ripped the sliding doors open. His breath hitched in his throat. Half the closet was completely empty, not ransacked, not torn apart in a struggle. Emptied. Every designer dress, every pair of Louboutins, every silk blouse, systematically removed. Only empty wooden hangers remained, swaying slightly in the draft from the air conditioning. Panic, sharp and suffocating, seized his chest. This wasn't a kidnapping. He spun around, rushing to the full-length mirror mounted on the far wall. He punched the concealed code into the digital keypad hidden behind the frame. The mirror popped open, revealing his secondary wall safe. He yanked the heavy steel door wide. Empty. The $3 million in emergency bearer bonds, the velvet pouches of conflict-free diamonds, his grandmother's heirloom jewelry, the backup passports. All gone. "No, no, no," Damien muttered, his breathing turning ragged and shallow. He was a man who thrived on control, a man who orchestrated life and death with a flick of his wrist. But the ground beneath his feet was rapidly dissolving into thin air. He ran from the bedroom, his heavy footsteps echoing terribly throughout the empty living spaces. He bounded down the reinforced staircase leading to the basement. This was his sanctuary, the fortified bunker where the Russo Empire's digital heart beat. The heavy, blast-proof steel door, which required a dual-factor biometric scan to open, was standing wide ajar. Damien stumbled into the chilled room. The server racks were still humming, their blue lights blinking rhythmically in the dark. He threw himself into the leather chair in front of the primary terminal and slammed his hand onto the mouse to wake the massive monitors. He didn't need to bypass any passwords. The screens were already unlocked, left deliberately open for him to find. Across all 3 monitors, banking interfaces from Zurich, the Cayman Islands, and Belize stared back at him. They were the master ledgers of the Russo Syndicate, the untouchable wealth accumulated over 3 generations of extortion, racketeering, and blood. Every single account showed a balance of $0. In the center of the main screen was a final, completed transaction receipt. $45 million, liquidated and transferred into an irrevocable, sovereign-shielded trust under the name SG Holdings. SG Serena Gallagher. Damien stared at the letters until they blurred. His wife, his sweet, brilliant, mathematically gifted wife, who had spent the last 5 years pretending to care about floral arrangements and charity galas. She hadn't just left him, she had financially decapitated him. But how? How could she have bypassed Thomas Blackwood's legal firewalls? Damien ripped his encrypted satellite phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently as he dialed the lawyer's secure line. It rang twice before clicking to an automated, generic voicemail box. Thomas was gone. He dialed Donovan Hayes, his mercenary security chief. "Boss," Donovan answered on the first ring, his voice lacking its usual cold, clinical detachment. He sounded out of breath, frantic. "Where are you?" "My house," Damien choked out, his voice sounding entirely foreign to his own ears. "Donovan, the money is gone. Serena took the ledgers. She took everything." There was a horrific silence on the other end of the line. "Boss, it's worse than the money," Donovan finally said, the background noise of screeching tires and distant sirens filtering through the speaker. "The feds just hit the New Jersey warehouses. All of them. Simultaneously. They didn't even bother with a perimeter. They knew exactly where the false walls were. They knew exactly which shipping containers held the product. Someone handed them the master architectural blueprints and the decryption keys to our comms." Damien felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin cold and clammy. "And Thomas?" Damien whispered. "I have eyes at JFK," Donovan replied grimly. "Thomas boarded a private charter to London 4 hours ago. He sold you out, Damien, and we just got word from a mole inside the district attorney's office. An automated email hit their servers at midnight. It contains audio files, tapes of you and Isabella Vitti, ledgers detailing the hits on Carlo and Paulie. They have a watertight RICO case, boss. The indictments are already signed." Damien's empire wasn't just crumbling. It had been rigged with explosives and detonated while he was sitting blindfolded in the center of it. "You need to run, Damien," Donovan urged, the loyalty in his voice fracturing under the weight of self-preservation. "Get to the Teterboro airstrip. Use the Gulf Stream. If you stay in Manhattan, you're doing life in ADX Florence." "The Gulf Stream is under the holding company," Damien realized aloud, his voice hollow. "She made me sign the blind trust last month. I signed over the planes, the safe houses, the deeds." He looked around the basement walls. "I don't even own this building anymore." "I'm sorry, boss. I have to go dark," Donovan said. The line clicked, followed by the drone of a dead dial tone. Damien dropped the phone. It clattered against the floorboards. He slowly stood up, feeling as though he were moving through deep water, and dragged himself up the stairs to the main floor. He walked into the massive open-concept dining room. The 20-seat mahogany table, where he had hosted capos, politicians, and judges, was entirely bare, save for one spot at the head of the table. Sitting perfectly centered on the polished wood was a single, crisp ultrasound photograph. Damien's legs finally gave out. He collapsed into the chair, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the glossy paper. It was the profile of his son, a tiny, perfect curve of a face hidden within the static of the imaging machine. He traced his thumb over the image, a singular, jagged sob ripping its way out of his throat. Pinned beneath the photograph was a thick piece of stationery. He recognized the monogram at the top. It was from the bespoke stationery set he had bought her in Paris. He pulled the note free. Her elegant, cursive handwriting, usually reserved for thank-you notes and dinner invitations, felt like a physical knife dragging across his retinas. "You broke your vow, Damien. I smelled the baccarat rouge on your collar months ago. I knew about the hotel in the Catskills. I knew about the burner phone you kept in the glove box of the Maybach. While you were building an alliance in Isabella Vitti's bed, I was auditing your empire. I watched you burn your own lieutenants to the ground over money I had already moved. I watched you go to war with the Vitti family over a theft I orchestrated. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, so convinced of your absolute power, that you never once looked at the woman sitting across from you at the dinner table. The money is gone, the properties are sold, Thomas has fled, and the feds have your ledgers. By the time you read this, The life you thought you commanded will be nothing but a crime scene. You promised me this world would never touch me. You lied. So I protected our son the only way I could, by ensuring you have absolutely nothing left to pass down to him. A king without a kingdom cannot command an heir. Do not look for us. We will never be found. Damien let the paper fall from his fingers. The reality of his complete and utter annihilation settled over him like a suffocating blanket of ash. Serena had never been a fragile civilian. She had been the most lethal apex predator in his entire orbit, and he had willingly handed her the keys to his destruction, completely mesmerized by the illusion of her submission. She had weaponized his paranoia, his infidelity, and his pride, turning the very foundations of his criminal enterprise into a trap that snapped shut the moment he walked through the door. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He had always viewed the city as his kingdom, a sprawling grid of lights and shadows that bent to his will. Now, the city was coming for him. Far below, echoing up from the canyons of the financial district, the wail of sirens began to rise. It wasn't just one or two cruisers. It was a chorus of them, a mechanized scream of flashing red and blue lights multiplying across the grid, converging on his location. The doorman hadn't called up. The private security detail downstairs was either already in handcuffs or had abandoned their posts the moment the FBI tactical vans breached the lobby. Damien Russo didn't run. He didn't scramble for the stairs, and he didn't pick up his gun. He simply sat at the head of his empty table in a penthouse he no longer owned, devoid of the wealth he had killed for, mourning a son he would never meet. He picked up the ultrasound photograph, pressing the glossy paper against his lips as the heavy, rhythmic thud of a battering ram began to echo against the reinforced steel doors of his foyer. He closed his eyes, finally understanding the true cost of his betrayal. He was the king of New York, and he was completely, utterly alone in the dark. After the affair, the Mafia boss returned home is a story that subverts the traditional power dynamics of underworld romance. It strips away the glamorized illusions of the Mafia lifestyle, replacing them with the cold, calculative reality of a woman fighting for her survival and her child's future. Serena Russo did not rely on physical violence or the intervention of another man to save her. She weaponized her intellect, her patience, and her husband's own arrogance against him. The tragedy of Damien Russo is that his downfall was entirely self-inflicted, a direct result of his inability to see his wife as an equal. In the end, the story proves that the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one with the loudest voice or the biggest gun, but the one who quietly controls the ledger.